I'll just disappear.
Sure.
Okay. It's fine. Good morning, everyone. It's the 7th of January, 2022. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, Jen.
Happy New Year.
Okay, great. Yes, it's a new year. It's 2022 or 2022. And we will be covering a number of stories this morning or this evening if you're in the east coast of the US. Firstly, we're going to be sharing a message from Vijay Prishad from the Tricontinental Alliance, and a wonderful New Year's message that he's given there, has been written there. We'll also be talking about the virus, of course, Omicron, and cases. The US setting a new record of 1 million cases in a single day, 2 days running actually, with also a message from the head of the Chinese mission, I'd say, or head of the Chinese medical organization. The US, Russia, and France, as well as all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, have essentially agreed that no to nuclear war. So we'll be talking about that. Big news in terms of the macroeconomics of the United States. For the first time in history, a company has overtaken, a foreign company has overtaken a US company for car sales in America. We'll tell you which one it is, and we'll talk about that. That's very important. Then the RCEP, an economic zone, a free trade zone, has been started today in Southeast Asia. Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of a Silicon Valley startup, has been convicted, and we'll be talking about what she did and what she promised and what she was not able to fulfill on, as well as some interesting bits around that. Of course, yesterday was the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th uprising in Washington, D.C. We'll be talking about that. Tony Blair was knighted in the UK, the former Prime Minister, and a petition has now arisen asking for the Queen to rescind it, and we'll be talking about that and definitely be recommending that you sign that petition. The Communist Party of Sudan, I should say, has made a statement, and we'll be reading that about the situation in Sudan. But one of our big stories today, which we'll end with, is the situation in Kazakhstan. So we're talking about what's happening in Kazakhstan and what different people are saying and what different organizations are saying. So we'll read a message from the Communist Party of Greece, as well as a workers' organization in Kazakhstan, and also analyzing it ourselves with what we can see from international media. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Jen. Well, you're always here. You're part of it. You're part of it. So. Okay, so let's start with the message from Vijay Prishad, which is a beautiful piece. Let me get that in the stream for us. It says, "We dance into the new year, banging our hammers and swinging our sickles." Let's just check. Window. Yes, 1 second. I'll get that open for you now. Wait. Tab. Yeah, here we go. So here it is. We dance into the new year, we dance into the new year, banging our hammers and swinging our sickles. The 50-second newsletter. So this is from Vijay Prashad. This is the Tricontinental. And Vijay Prashad, if anyone knows, is a great writer and speaker on many topics. But in this thing here, he talks about catastrophic defeats in the global north. Obviously, some pretty bad stuff about COVID-19 and how it's been dealt with in the global north. Interesting piece here about Cuba. Cuba leads the world with the highest vaccination rates using its own indigenous vaccines, as well as, of course, mentioning that Vietnam and Venezuela also have had successful campaigns. Obviously, not all rosy, though. So obviously, last year was not a wonderful year. There are lots of countries that don't have any vaccination. Countries like Burundi, Eritrea, Haiti, South Sudan, very low vaccination rates. In fact, if we went off Burundi, so in Burundi, 0.04% of the population was vaccinated as of the 15th of December. And if they followed that rate, they would only achieve 70% coverage by the year 2111. So let's hope that Burundi can get some more vaccines in the coming year. What else do they mention? They mention, of course, Omicron, the rise of Omicron. But Vijay Prishad, or the Tricontinental, I should say, talks about 4 apartheids of our time. Food apartheid, money apartheid, education apartheid, okay, and vaccine apartheid is the 4th one. Talking about some of the, some of the problems in terms of food security in particularly Africa, and that's actually increased. So the UN's Agricultural Organization has said that the number of undernourished people in Africa has increased by 89 million since 2014, reaching 281 million in 2020. So considering all of the advancements in technology we have, and the fact that perhaps also, food security should have been solved many decades ago. It shouldn't be the case, but we still have even increasing food insecurity in Africa, which is a great tragedy. Other things he mentions, of course, is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And let's see. Very interesting. So he references this. Let's see here. Yes. Okay, so talking about human rights, and then talking about China. Talking about some great successes. So Chinese people eradicating extreme poverty, with nearly 100 million people lifting themselves out of absolute misery over the last 8 years. Which is a great feat, a remarkable feat. Also mentioning that last year, the Indian farmers fought against 3 laws, breaking their backs, and they struggled, and they won, which was a great victory. And you can read their reports on that in the Farmers' Revolt in India, which was published in June. He also talks about then, of course, as we mentioned last week, Jen, the pink tide, leftist governments, whatever you want to call them, coming to power in Bolivia, Chile, and Honduras. And of course, overturning a history of coups and regime changes in that country that ran from 1973. Which is great news. Let's see what else. Let me see. I'm going to finish this and then I'll hear your thoughts on it, Jen. Also, I think something that should be mentioned, which is mentioned here, is it looks like for 2022 that Lula da Silva will defeat whoever is the rights candidate, whether it's Bolsonaro or someone else, which would be quite a big victory for the pink tide and for Latin American left movements. That would be the sort of, I guess, the pearl, the jewel in the crown, to use a colonial imperial reference.
Right.
What else have we got? Yes. Also, then an interesting thing you mentioned here, which I think I had not heard of this, is there was in Burkina Faso, obviously the French military has troops and deployments all over North and West Africa. But there was a scene in Burkina Faso where a bunch of local people in November were driving near a town, and the crowd of people demonstrating or protesting stopped it. And then the French launched a little surveillance drone to look at the crowd, and a 13-year-old shot down the drone with his slingshot. And this obviously became sort of a David and Goliath kind of moment. But he's talking about the fact that, there's a rising tide of anger on the African continent against the increasing military presence of the US and France. And that town was Kaya in Burkina Faso. Then, of course, lots of strikes last year, mentioned here by Vijay Prishad. And, of course, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So I'm not going to go into the rest of the document. It's still pretty long. But what we'll finish with is a nice little poem here by Siavash Kasrai, written in 1959, from his book Arash the Archer. And the poem is not only about struggles, for we also wonder about possibilities. So this is the poem, and this is just a nice end to last year, the beginning of this year. So I'll read this for you. I told you life is beautiful. Told and untold, there is a lot here. The clear sky, the golden sun, the flower gardens, the boundless plains, the flowers peeping up through the snow, the tender swing of fish dancing in crystal of water, the scene of rain-swept dust on the mountainside, the sleep of wheat fields in the spring of moonlight, to come, to go, to run, to love, to lament for humankind, and to revel, arm in arm with the crowd's joys. So there we go. Warmest of wishes for a revolutionary 2022 from Vijay Prashad. So wonderful, great little piece there, and of course some poetry. Of course, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Jen? On Vijay Prashad's diagnosis 2022 and prospects for diagnosis for 2021 and prospects for 2022.
I mean, to sum it up, 2021 was the year of yet another kind of paradigm shift, I would say. And of course, it's reflected by everything that was talked about in the article. You know, there is some that in the past that studies contemporary history that would say that 9/11, 2001, was a paradigm shift. Where, of course, we knew what happened. The American strategy and policy shifted drastically, and into committing to the Middle East, so-called anti-terrorism, right? So-called security operations. Well, it's actually just the opposite of those. So, but it's kind of, how do I say? This is why the future is so hard to predict. The capitalism is corrupt, but and decaying, but it didn't die. That was the supposed irony, right? But now it's after many decades, after like capitalist realism, people thought that capitalism was immortal when that became the new norm. Because previously the norm was that capitalism is going to collapse and socialism is going to win. And after that, after collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, we're in the era where capitalism is immortal. But then now, again, we are in the era of the death of capitalism once again. So, well, I'm just going to say that history is what we make of it.
Sure.
As in, like, the primary entity, the protagonist, is the collective economic and conceptual behavior of the people of the world, instead of just whatever we want to see it as, with publishing a few silly little papers such as the kinds of or Gordon Chang or Fukuyama and such. But yeah, that's all I want to say.
Sure. Sure. We don't have to give a whole philosophical of the entirety of history, but sure.
Oh, and one quick point. This is also the 10-year anniversary since the supposed end of the world, 2012. So once again, it shows to prove this point.
Yes. I think it's important to remember that 10 years ago, well, a week ago, it was the 1st of January, wasn't it? It was on the 1st of January. Yeah, so 2012
was
10 years. January. The world was supposed to end according to the Mayan calendar, and 10 years later, here we still are. So
yes,
maybe if there was a problem with the calendar, maybe it was delayed, it's still fine. Everything's okay. Although 10 years ago, we do have now we have a global pandemic, so maybe it just was the beginning of the end. Maybe the world is still ending.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I mean, the world. God. Yeah, we already did that episode about the end of the world.
Appalling.
Maybe it doesn't happen all of a sudden. Maybe this is what it is. It is ending. It just takes time. Anyways, we've talked about the end of the world already.
Yes.
So as we know, the world is already ending.
If we don't get copyrighted, we should just blast that song on every episode. The end of the end of the world as we know it. But anyways, let's continue.
All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about, talking about the end of the world, talking about global shifting, paradigm shifting moments. Yes, of course, there's always virus news. So virus news, tell us virus news. Well, I think you can tell us. You can break the big story there for us, Jen, about.
Sure. I mean, obviously, the big news is the 1 million new cases of COVID a day for 2 days in a row now. I mean, what on earth even is that?
Yeah, that's.
I know, like, we ask this question every single week about COVID, or other things as well. But seriously, I'm bilingual, Chinese and English. I don't know any words that can describe like my disbelief at this, because the United States as a whole is only 400 million people.
Right.
And
right.
if in our previous conversation we mentioned that if the math adds up, this number will only increase. It is going to take less than a year for every single person to be infected again.
Just so people know exactly what we said. So, if you had 1 million cases on one day, and bear in mind that was followed by 1 million cases on the next day,
Mhm.
if you don't have masks and whatever restrictions that you put to curb the movement, it will compound. There will be a day perhaps next week. I'll make a prediction. If nothing changes, there will be a day next week, maybe in the next 5 days, where maybe 2 million people will get tested positive for the virus.
Right.
Yeah, because it's just a mathematical fact. If there's no on behavior, then that number will get higher because more people have the virus. So it's a mathematical fact.
Back during March of last year, March 18th, the Iranian scientists already released them now peer-reviewed and published paper where they were explaining that they found that because immunity in the infected does not last, therefore, and there's like a varying degrees, right? But in general, the time span for immunity in the human body after infection is very short. Compared to like if we get infected to other viruses, what it leads to is simply the fact that herd immunity at the time, according to the Iranian scientists, was thought to be not possible because you will just get reinfected regardless if there is new variants or not. So then we're looking at compounded with everything that we've mentioned in every episode before this. What this simply means is that it's going to wash over the American population like a tide, and then there is going to be no herd immunity. It does not, in fact, help because of the immunity bypassing rate. So what that means is long COVID is going to hit many Americans. So the Chinese leading epidemiologist, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, for American audience, think like our version of Dr. Fauci, but like actually like functioning and has a brain and has morality. Who basically says has been interviewed either yesterday or today, depending on how you count time zones, on live TV that since all these new variants are coming out, and also as a side news, there is a new variant coming out of France, temporarily designated as IHU, or I hate you, but the reason it hasn't been given a Greek alphabet yet is because we don't know if the variant is like more severe than previous ones in some way.
Sure.
So like the way it goes is that there is hundreds, if not at this point thousands of variants and mutations, but only those who will spread on a major scale that is in some if some of its attributes is more concerning and worse than the previous variants, will it be given a Greek alphabet. So Omicron
variants of concern usually are given the
so we don't know about this one. So what Dr. Zhong said is that the IHU variant possibly could have existed around the same time as Omicron did, and has double the amount of mutations on its spike protein, which is really the key here.
That's good.
Yeah. Then even Omicron. And Omicron has one order of magnitude more than Delta. So then what it means is that from basic common sense, IHU will very likely be able to bypass immunity even more than Omicron does. And we're seeing what Omicron is doing in the United States. Again, 1 million a day. We opened up today's episode with that.
Right.
So then Dr. Zhong has basically given this statement that creating newer and newer vaccines for all these different variants has essentially become pointless. And that physical, like you said, Richard, physical means of wearing a mask, quarantine, contact tracing, disinfection, and lockdowns has will become the dominant means of a society to be able to deal with COVID in the future.
So just to clarify, you said that the vaccines are not the main sort of thing. Or
Exactly.
Vaccines are still necessary, but to end this, it's about physical control of the virus.
Exactly. Because, again, we've talked about this a few weeks ago of purely from an attritional perspective, the virus is going to be upgrading, in quotations marks, itself way faster than any human effort. And that's clearly being seen in open daylight now.
Yeah. I think just so that we can get the context again for the case differences. So I've forgotten the name of the city, but there were 3 cases in a city in, was it Hunan? I think it was Hunan. Hunan. And they shut down. So it was a city of 1 million people. And that, yes, let's just put it here. Yuzhou, that's it. Yuzhou and Zhengzhou.
Hunan's the province.
Hunan's the province. Yuzhou and Zhengzhou cities. And after a handful of cases, 18 cases, the city is put in lockdown. So just put that into contrast, comparison, right? 1 million cases in the US. The whole 1 million people got it in one day, and no real major change in the approach. And then if you contrast that with China, 18 cases and the whole city's in lockdown. But yeah, I think we've spoken. Yeah, go ahead.
I do have 2 things to say. One is that at this point in the United States, I sincerely, just out of a perspective of industrial production, I suspect that the future numbers in the United States, that's the official numbers of infection, is simply going to be dependent on the amount of test kits they can manufacture.
Yeah.
And I would also say that the future number of hospitalization is going to be purely dependent on the amount of hospital beds that can actually be opened and available.
Right. I think that's something that we saw in India too, is that statistics are become the reality is not something that can be quantified by any sort of scientific body, because there's no way of tracking it, like you say, because eventually hospital beds are full and the hospitals turn people away. They don't know how many people they've turned away because the gates are closed like they were in India.
Right.
And so exactly, then it becomes purely an academic exercise that we say, well, we think this many people had it. We think this many people died. It's actually it's pretty that's now where it becomes a phenomenon beyond the state. It becomes almost a force of nature.
Precisely.
Yeah. Okay, but let's move on from the virus. I think people probably are fatigued with this news, and we'll have to talk about this every week. Maybe 2023 will maybe a year from now will be less of a thing. But nonetheless, let's talk about this nuclear war statement. So it's from Permanent 5 of the Security Council. So that's Russia, China, Britain, US, and France say no one can win nuclear war. And this is from CNBC, the one I'm going to read to you here. They agreed that a further spread of nuclear arms and a nuclear war should be avoided, according to a joint statement by the 5 nuclear powers published by the Kremlin on Monday. So we affirm that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The English version of the statement read, which I think I'm curious what your thoughts on this one. I do know that I think the person who coined this term, the person who coined this term was actually Gorbachev in the 80s, and he said nuclear war is unwinnable. And obviously that helped with the strategic arm limitation talk SALT back in the 80s. Where this fits into, I mean, obviously Mao has always had an interesting perspective on this nuclear war, in contrast to Khrushchev, if we want to bring back the historical perspective on this, and where it fits into revolutionary struggle and whatnot. But I don't know if we want to go too far into that. So what are your thoughts on that one, Jen?
I will mention a few things quickly, but they are very important things.
Mm.
One is that according to Western theories based on zero-sum competitions, not win-win, I win competitions, war is only prevented. World war is only prevented by nuclear weapons because no one can win.
Mhm.
So then there's two directions to take this. One is the idealist direction, where yes, no more nuclear war. So like I suspect that there's like a world Armageddon clock in some major city
Yes.
that will probably tick back by a few marks for sure. But so everyone should be glad for that, at least on that simplistic level. But then there's the rational level of well, then are we just going to start to see conventional wars again?
Hmm. Well, that's it, right? Yeah. I
Because
think
the preventer for large-scale conventional war is nuclear, the ability for mutually assured destruction,
sure.
and that's why we only see total wars between smaller nations, but we no longer see total wars between nations that are like where wars where both sides are nuclear armed. It's only temporary skirmishes at best. So then what it means is you brought up the nuclear theory. It's all about deterrence, but the problem with the concept of deterrence itself is that it is using force to manipulate and coerce and extort an foreign entity that's not you.
Hmm.
That's what that means. Uh, and obviously that's illegitimate. And in terms of deterrence, there's not only the infamous nuclear MAD, mutually assured destruction, there's also conventional MAD. So think of the military dynamics between North Korea and South Korea.
Yes.
It's actually a kind of not just nuclear MAD, but also the conventional forces of DPRK needs to make sure that it can cause sufficient damage to the South Korean military and the U.S. military and the Japanese military, so that the risk of invading North Korea is too expensive, thus protecting themselves and protecting the people of socialist Korea. So then, which countries? Okay, twofold. One is that it's very clearly an equation in three parts. One is the buildup of forces. Two is the willingness, the intention, the mental conception in regards to using the forces. And then three is communication with the people that you're trying to deter. So as we see, it's a dialectical phenomenon, a trinity, not just I have how many bombs, you have how many bombs. And if you have 300, I have one, you win. No, it's not like that.
Mhm.
So Mao, as a great dialectician, understood that phenomenon. He was literally, I would argue, the earliest person in human political activity to understand that, and therefore he created a strategy where, for very very low cost, in terms of material and human cost, but for by using the building of conceptual thinking, conception, and conceptual power, and
Mhm.
communicating your strategic and tactical intent to the enemy, that even though China had the least amount of nukes out of the big five, it is still able to deter the enemy and protect itself. Whereas Khrushchev was pretty much a mechanical materialist who said, okay, they have 2,000 bombs, I want 2,500 bombs.
Right.
It's silly. One of the many silly things that the Khrushchev and his revisionism has done.
Sure.
So, with that out of the way, I would then just go ahead and say, like, the equation of deterrence, and therefore the world order and the balance of power of the world, is going to change because of this. And the complications that's going to be caused by that, literally no one knows. We are not, though we are the Marxist think tank, we are not the big, huge think tanks with terabytes of supercomputers.
Sure.
We are not capable of that kind of prediction, so
Sure.
that's it on that topic.
I think just something that I've never noticed before, perhaps you've noticed,
Uh,
is that I didn't know that China has a no strike first policy. So
Oh, that's known to every single Chinese person.
okay. I was
yeah.
So
It's a very widely known thing in China. We have a no first use policy.
in terms of a a position. It's quite exactly. It's quite unaggressive, right? So the Chinese will not fire first; it will only respond with nuclear weapons. Okay, cool. And just on some numbers, I mean, it does say that according to CNBC, and the Pentagon says that they increased. So their estimates of nuclear weapons for China over the coming years, saying Beijing could have 700 warheads by 2027 and possibly 1,000 by 2030. But bear in mind, that's only what? So is it 7,000 that the US and Russia have each? More or less around 7,000?
No, that was the Cold War numbers. Right now it's around 2,000 plus.
2,000 plus. Okay, so we're talking about the Chinese only having half of what Russia and China have right now.
Even in the most liberal estimates.
That's the Pentagon, exactly. That's the Pentagon, whose job is to justify their existence of defense. So you always make the threat bigger than it is. So otherwise you don't get the job. Okay, but so that's that. Let's move on to, in terms of another big geopolitical big story, and this is a big deal because of what it signifies, what it means. So, and I'm not talking about the nukes. I'm actually talking about that in the US this year, or sorry, just last year, for the first time in 120 years, a foreign car manufacturer, overtook GM or any American car manufacturer for the top spot in car sales in the US. And that was taken by Toyota. So Toyota has overtaken GM in the first time in history to be top car salesman. So just go into this. So obviously this big ramifications of, it's more of what this means rather than this being, this is a reflection of reality rather than something that has happened. It's already happened. Okay.
Right.
So for 2021, first time a foreign car maker. So bear in mind, for 120 years, this has never ever happened. A US company has always been top manufacturer and top car sales, basically. So Toyota says that it sold 2.3 million trucks and cars in the US in 2021. Without having to read this entire article from the New York Times, this is obviously just a big sign of, I suppose, deindustrialization, the uncompetitiveness of lots of car industries in the US. But I mean, also at the same time, this has happened. This position of Toyota winning, if you want to use that terminology. But we have to remember that the U.S. car industry, I mean, we all know about Detroit and it being completely deindustrialized, and American industry overall being is becoming weaker. And specifically, they were bailed out. Obama bailed out the American car manufacturers a few years ago. I think it was 2000. It was after the collapse, perhaps, or maybe 2012. I'm not sure. So it's not like the writing hasn't been on the wall.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a big deal for the U.S. I mean, the car, to buy a car and the American dream and all that kind of stuff. It's a very fundamental part of the American perspective, the American economic outlook, and the American life, and of its image. So to have the American man or person driving Japanese cars, more of them driving Japanese cars than American cars. That's a big moment, I think.
Sure.
What do you think?
I mean, everything that you said is exactly correct. I will just add the So while I was still in middle school here in America, I read in the history books, in U.S. history, world history, and later on sociology, that I forgot which publisher the textbook was from. But essentially, they say that societies evolve from agrarian, industrial, and then into post-industrial societies.
Yes.
And they say that a society of finance and being dominated by service industry and is deindustrialized is the sign of advancements. And in that book, it says that China is one era behind the Western world, being still stuck in the industrial age. look where everything is now. I mean, good God. I'm
Right.
serious. Last year, if we started this program in like beginning of 2020, then what we would have been talking about is how Laos is able to outproduce COVID PPE compared to all Western nations combined.
Right.
Oh, that's still in my mind. I was struck by that. And what industrialization really means is a efficient, for better or worse, because obviously in the capitalism is for everything's built for the purpose of profit extraction and exploitation. But nonetheless, you are creating a system that is efficient, speedy, centralized, and convenient. That's the hallmarks of in industrial society. But then industrial society is operated by workers, so what that means is that every worker has to have at least some conception of basic conceptions of math, science, the world, stuff like that. So what does that mean? That means that it is the, according to Marx and Engels, the basic qualities of what you would need for a socialist society, where people have some level of education and awareness of the whole society and what their role in it is, and so on and so forth, and the ability to think for themselves. Whereas if you had a illiterate feudal medieval society, and then of course we can know the rest. So then for America to in the Western world to deindustrialize so much to this point, and I imagine with compounded with COVID, inflation, recession, depression, so on and so forth, it's only going to get worse from here. What does that mean for the society? We do not know. It's gonna. But one thing I will say, and this is a viewpoint borrowed from a great Marx economist, Professor Michael Hudson, is that we are going to return to feudalism, techno-feudalism, and that is what the ruling class enjoys seeing. So that's what I want to say on that.
Interesting. I mean, I think we should bring up and talk about this techno-feudalism. It's an idea that I think some people have probably heard. Another proponent or person who mentioned this is obviously Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek Marxist and former finance minister. Yes, he also talks about techno-feudalism a lot. Yeah, we should talk about that sometime more specifically. But yeah, I do think your point is very interesting about that idea of the industrial society, so the agrarian society, the industrialist society, and then the information or tertiary or services society, the third step in that, the idea that that China is behind because it hasn't entered the information side, the services side. It's still in the industrial side. But also at the same time, I mean, also they refer to this as the middle income trap, that China is trying to overcome the middle income trap right now, that jump from industrial to information society. It is interesting. If you look at the state of America, there is a big question mark, and the state of the UK and many other countries who have gone beyond industrialization. Sort of. Does it work? Is it better? And if you think about Brexit, if you think about Trump and the anger that is in the working class of the US and of the UK and of other countries too, there is a big question mark over whether that is the trajectory that should be followed. That's the direction should be followed. I don't know why my camera's decided to become extremely blurry, but I'm sure it'll come back. There we go. Okay. Let's move on to, in terms of economics then, we've got another story which you brought for us, which is the RCEP officially enters into force on the 1st of January. It came on. So that is the RCEP, is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between the ASEAN members, Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and 4 non-ASEAN signatory states, China, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia, indicating that the world's largest trade deal so far has set sail. Wow. So that's massive news. So that's yesterday from People's Daily Online. Yeah.
Yes.
The world's largest trade deal ever. Wow. Big news. Yeah. Okay. So what are your thoughts on that one? Actually, I think I'll throw in some thoughts first. At the same time, so a corresponding story to this, which we have not been able to cover today because there's been too much news, is there's a defense deal that has just been always going through the motions with Australia, US, UK, the Quad as it's called, And now Japan is thinking of joining this, and it's also being referred to as the new NATO of the East to counter China in the Indo-Pacific, as we always hear about. But in the same moment, in the same breath, today then Australia, this apparent opponent, as well as Japan, are both entering this giant trade zone. So things happen at the same time. Lots of things happen at the same time. Contradictory things, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, not to get too complicated, I'll try to finish this up.
Yeah, we've got
in the most streamlined way possible, not to get too complicated. One is that Asia, East Asia, that's the biggest, and South East Asia combined, is the biggest market in the world, period.
Yes.
That treaty was signed earlier last year. And of course, it was huge news. And of course, it was said that it'll go into action January 1st of 2022. And it did. And on the very first day, we saw massive sales boom for every single country involved. India was supposed to be a part of this, but due to one reason or another, we are not India issues experts here. So we do not quite know why they didn't join. But from some experts I have heard, they would say stuff like, "Oh, maybe it's because the kind of Indian small-time subsidiary production individual artisans would not be able to keep up, and they would get hurt in this treaty or something along those lines." But what it is regarding the contradiction is, I would say, it's very simple. Foundation determines superstructure. As in the capitalists, governments of especially Japan, but also Australia, need to profit. The workers, the people need to eat, and would like a increasing quality of life. And the administration, if they do not promise that, they get kicked out, and another administration comes in, so they lose power. So due to those reasons, they want to keep trade. Of course they do. But at the same time, these are the kind of successors of the reactionary legacies of American imperialism, Japanese imperialism, so on and so forth, right? So out of the interest of preserving their own power, which is the same interest that led them to signing the treaty, by the way, they also need to make sure that concepts such as socialism or socialist national liberation, so on and so forth, does not spread there, or else they lose their power. So it is out of their. This is what Mao talks about with the unity of the opposites, right? This seemingly contradicting phenomenon is united by the desire of a reactionary ruling class to continue to maintain their power. And in order to do that, they must do seemingly contradictory things, because from their perspective, it's the same thing. Preserving their power. That's it.
Okay. I just wanted to add something that on February 1st, South Korea will be joining too, just in case someone was if they were wondering who else was not in it. But sure. There any final thoughts on this one before we move on?
Well, no, that's all I had.
That's good. That's fine. That was fine. I don't really have anything else to add to it either. I'm just trying to move along. We do have a lot of interesting things to cover. So I'm going to just mention two things quickly in passing, which we haven't got time to go into in depth. The first one is Elizabeth Holmes. Now, if you don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is, she is famous now around the world because she had a company in Silicon Valley which promised all of these wonderful things. It was a health company, a health startup in Silicon Valley, and it promised to basically, it was a blood test. So you would take a sort of fingerprint, just a sort of blood, a tiny bit of blood, and it would be able to run all these diagnostics, which a lot of people were very happy about. So a lot of people invested in this idea because they thought the idea was brilliant. This basic sort of super company where you could diagnose diseases and ailments and all sorts of things in a flash, in a moment. And so there she is. And the name of the company, sorry, was Theranos. So if you want another more ominous sounding thing, Theranos. So she's been, the verdict. She's guilty. So she's been found guilty of 4 charges of fraud. Just to give you the sort of the takeaways, the 5 takeaways. Yes, she's guilty of fraud because the company could not, or basically the technology didn't exist. It was a classic, fake it till you make it kind of ethos of Silicon Valley, that you say that you have a product, you say that you can do this, and then you get people to invest, and then you kind of come up with the plans along the way. Fake it till you make it. And in this case, it didn't work out. It didn't work out because the science behind the product didn't work. It was more about marketing and branding and being charismatic and attractive and youthful, and selling it rather than making it. So in this case, lots of people lost a lot of money. And you can read about it further in your own time because we haven't got time to cover it today. But I think one thing that I did pick up on this, which was quite interesting, is that there were lots of people defrauded. Obviously, some ordinary people, secretaries, and people who live nearby, live in the area, or whatever, related to the company or perhaps working for a similar company, invested too. So there wasn't just only bad people that lost money, for quote unquote, to use that terminology. But for some reason, you also had investment from the big wigs, sort of billionaires and whatnot. But also Henry Kissinger was on the board of this company. So take your time to go and read that one yourself. A very interesting story there coming out of Silicon Valley. Now, the next one I've got to cover, which I would like people, if they are in the UK, watching from the UK, is Tony Blair was given a knighthood by Queen Elizabeth II, our sovereign. And I don't really need to perhaps mention why there's a problem with that, or why you should perhaps be angry about that. But I'll tell you the good news. The good news, so he has been knighted, which is the bad news. But the good news is there's a petition to rescind his knighthood. Not that we should be, who cares about knighthood? Who cares about what the aristocracy and the royalty has to say about stuff? But I think if it just was to piss and embarrass Tony Blair, then that's worth enough for me. But there's a petition going around to rescind it. And it's got hundreds of thousands of signatures already. I think it was at 600,000. Yes, more than 600,000 on January the 4th. So we don't know what the number is right now. It, of course, has no legal force, but it's massively embarrassing. If that number gets to 1 million or more, then it's extremely embarrassing, and they have to consider it at least, or at least pay lip service to it. So if you are in the UK, please go onto the site, which I think we have it here. Yeah, it's change.org. Petition details. So I'll put that in the description for us to go.
Oh, God.
The petition is currently at 954,932. So I'll put that up. 1 second. I'll put that up because it's worth putting up. A bit of I don't know. So if you want to do something,
the MTT is an anti-aristocratic organization.
Yes.
That,
just to clarify, we do not care about the aristocracy's opinions of what
that's helped overthrow a king last week, and this week tried
No, we're actively overthrowing monarchies in Africa. So please join this petition, which is now at 954,000. Oh, 945, just gone up by 2. It's about to get to 1 million. So the goal is 1 million. Only 45,000 more people need to sign it, and we're there. So maybe if you're lucky as well, you could be that millionth signature. Who knows what maybe win a prize. Maybe you win a prize. But well, you win the prize.
You get a knighthood. Oh God.
Maybe you get a knighthood. Yeah, sure. But there we go. Let's piss off Tony Blair. Let's embarrass the war criminal, the murderer, and peace envoy to the Middle East, of course. Tony Blair, who's not, he's an absolute. I'm not going to swear. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so please go ahead and sign that petition to rescind his knighthood. Anyway, so a minor story we need to cover before we go into our big topic. So we want to spend at least a few minutes talking about Kazakhstan. A quick reflection on the anniversary of January 6th, if you want there, Jen. It was obviously a year ago. You're still on January 6th in the US right now, so it's a year ago for you. But For the rest of us, it was yesterday. So, quick thoughts on that.
I was I believe I was going home here in the U.S. Reuniting with my mother for some New Year shenanigans. And on the road, I just was reading that on my phone, watching the entire January 6th event unfold. And mind you, back in those days, there was there's still like the COVID lockdown in the United States, whether or not you believe it or not. And it was this. You start to see many very, very extremely strange dynamics. One is not so strange, actually, that the American working class, at least a good portion of it, actually believed that they needed to make sacrifices to uphold the lockdown to save their people and their country. A kind of working class patriotism. But then that was squashed, not because of any kind of crackdown, but literally because of the incompetency of the United States government. Your state government, average state government will say something like, yes, we are in a lockdown, except for the cases of, but you cannot go out except in the cases of literally anything you want. So effectively, not a lockdown, and the American people are very tired of this stuff. After a few rounds of repetitive nonsense, remember when the CDC said that don't need masks, no need for anything, just wash your hands, and it's gonna magically disappear. But also specifically about this event. What I remembered was that it was one of those things that seemed like the country is going to fall apart. It was a legitimate constitutional crisis, where the constitutional system of the United States is in question. Who controls the military? Who has command of the military? Who does military obey to? Who does the say National Guards take orders from? And of the election electoral system. How do you count votes? Are votes even legitimate? If Mike Pence just straight up refused to announce the tickets of the Democrats, then do those tickets count? Even though we know in the computer systems that it does. Does it actually count, though? Because the system, the voting system is so antiquated that it was a system from the 1800s. I mean, quite literally. They refused to do it digitally. They refused to do it even over landlines. They only do what? The only upgrade is from horse carts to vehicles.
Right.
Yeah, and it gets even worse from there, right? During the moment that of National Guards needing to be deployed, the National Guards hesitated, which is a huge red flag. And for the American, for any country system, and gets downward spirals from there, right? For decades, American electoral system has been meddled with. So both parties meddle with the election to however much degree they can to try to win election through like manipulation, gerrymandering, tampering with systems, so passing laws, so on and so forth. But then, that's all fine and dandy if the ruling class upholds their consensus of what they want to see. But when the ruling class itself is in division, then these things went from, in the past, non-issues to nation-breaking constitutional crisis of, hey, you're meddling with the election. No, we're not. You're meddling with the election.
Right.
And then, because everybody starts to point fingers and so on and so forth, right? So then the last point on that would be, as we're seeing now from these articles, the United States FBI has arrested around 700 people already for the DC protest riot, here's another layer of hypocrisy to it's like the cherry and whipped cream on top. of this drink, I guess.
Okay.
It's when Russia during the whole Navalny incident arrested a few hundred, I believe.
Sure.
The whole world was freaking out. A journal, Alexander something got a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Sure.
We covered that.
Yes. Yeah.
But when the United States arrested 700 people and some people were even mysteriously missing or mysteriously committed suicide, that was never held accountable.
Sure.
So
Yeah. I mean,
what do you make of that?
The double standard is always there, right? I mean, yeah. We don't have enough time to go into this. I think we'll try and I think my final thought on this one is that it's almost it's been a year, and echoing actually what the Global Times had to say about this is that nothing has changed. The split and the divide of Reds and Blues and Dems and Republicans are still there. The divide amongst most people is still there. The tension is still there. There's been arrests and whatnot, but it's almost like we've just had a moment of pause, 1 year of pause. The virus, there's a graphic that they released showing, a year ago, the peak was 300,000 cases in a day, and the January 6th incident happened. And a year later, there's 1 million cases a day, and there's just been arrests and detention, and the fraught political situation is still there. To be honest, we're going to see, I think, the re-emergence of that political divide.
Yeah.
As we go into the midterms and next year, 2023, as the election cycle begins, it's going to be the same movie, and
yes,
all the arrows are pointing to Trump running again.
Yes.
And so let's not go into that now, because I think we're going to be talking about that.
But I just want to mention one small thing, very small thing. The American right-wingers have said that as soon as Biden got elected, the whole country started to act like Biden. That's true. I mean,
I got some truth to that. But let's get on to our big one. Let's get on to the big story, which we want to spend at least a few minutes. So we might have to go a little bit over time to cover this, because it's very, very interesting. And so first, obviously, this is our Communist Party news. So we're talking about the different news of the different CPs. So I'll just do a brief one first on the CP, the update from the CP of Sudan. So we're going to cover that first, and then on Kazakhstan. So as everyone knows, in Sudan, there's been quite a tense political situation with the army, basically a coup. The army came in and took power of the government. And this is an update from the Communist Party of Sudan. So let's just read this quickly. So on the 3rd of January, 2022. So January 1st marked Sudan's Independence Day, but there was nothing to celebrate in the country at the moment. Sudan, the 2nd of January, witnessed massive demonstrations under the slogan, "In memory of the martyrs." The main demand of thousands of protesters who took to the streets was the achievement of a complete civilian democratic rule and justice for the martyrs. Following the continuation of the firm rejection of the political agreement signed on the 21st of November between the leader of the coup, Burhan, and PM Hamdok by all active opposition forces, mainly the resistance committees, the Professional Alliance, and the Sudanese Communist Party, the reinstated PM announced his resignation yesterday. Hamdok's resignation is considered a blow to the military generals who had thought an agreement with him would appease the protests and legitimize their stay in power. These calculations were wrong. The masses continue to condemn and challenge the military coup and all decisions that were introduced. The current political crisis, deepened by the recent draconian laws, threatens to return the country to the authoritarian years of al-Bashir's dictatorial regime. The peaceful mass protests that swept the streets of a number of cities yesterday were met with brutal and excessive force, resulting in the killing of 2 demonstrators and over 90 people were seriously wounded. Furthermore, the wave of detention has continued as more than 350 activists were detained since last Thursday. 56 protesters were brutally killed by the security forces. The radical opposition forces are engaged in a series of urgent talks to finalize the political platform that will help to speed up, unify, and establish the central leadership, which plays the role of representing the resistance committees, the Professional Alliance, the Sudanese CP, and other political, civil, and opposition groups. At this critical stage of the struggle of our people aiming at defeating the military dictatorship and establishing the people's power, the Sudanese Communist Party calls on all fraternal parties, democratic and progressive parties, and organizations to continue their solidarity actions, to demand the abolition of the state of emergency and the draconian laws that followed, to demand the immediate release of all political detainees, to call for respecting the rights to peaceful protest actions and the right to internet access, demanding an end to internet shutdown. The Sudanese Communist Party avails itself of this opportunity to express its deep thanks to all the fraternal parties that have expressed their solidarity, and it appeals for more support in the coming battles. So that's from the Sudanese Communist Party Bureau of Information. So there you are. Let's see how that goes, and that's their message. That's their perspective of what's happening in their country, the Sudanese Communist Party. But now let's talk about Kazakhstan. So right now in Kazakhstan, there have been protests, some burning of public buildings, a pretty chaotic scene is going on. So there's a lot of angles to this which we need to mention. So and I think it's a very interesting story. So obviously it's the 30th anniversary. It was the 30th anniversary of the end of the USSR last week, the week before last. And that, with that narrative in mind, with that question in mind, that's a lot of the story comes from that, people mentioning this or referencing this. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the New York Times is talking about the fact that the government, the Kazakh government, has asked for Russia to intervene with security forces. Now, bear in mind the sort of let's say the tinder, the spark that led to this is there was an increase in the LPG price, so liquid propane gas. Most Kazakh people use LPG to fuel their cars, and obviously that would then extend to trucks and buses, and obviously the prices of other goods too. But obviously specifically, it was the price of LPG, a jolt in that price, which sent people into what's being described as a protest or a revolt, and then of course, 4 days later, burning of government buildings, TV stations, an airport, many businesses, and basically, it's being described as a full-throated attack on the entrenched Kazakh elite, widely reviled as autocratic and corrupt. So that's from the New York Times description, describing it as autocratic and corrupt. But I think we'll also mention, of course, so I'm not going to go to the statistics. So they burned a lot of cars and businesses. But let's read here. There's a message from the Communist Party of Greece on the mobilization. So the KKE, their opinion on this. So I'm going to read this for you quickly. It's a short message. The KKE salutes the large-scale workers' strikes and people's demonstrations in Kazakhstan against high prices, unemployment, poverty, misery, and other major social problems to which the capitalist system has led millions of people 30 years after the counter-revolutionary overthrow and the dissolution of the USSR. We express our solidarity with the thousands of workers who, in defiance of the police state and repression regime, took to the streets demanding the improvement of their standing of living and expressing their opposition to the looting of the country's energy wealth by monopolies. We demand the release of all protesters detained by the police, as well as the release of all political prisoners, the abolition of all anti-union and anti-labor laws, which have outlawed hundreds of trade unionism in recent years, in an effort to allow the government to control the labor trade union movement. And we demand the legalization of the socialist movement of Kazakhstan and the Communist Party of Kazakhstan, which have been banned by the country's authorities. That is from the International Relations section of the Communist Party or the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Greece. So what are your thoughts on this, Jen? I think something that I've seen, perhaps that we have to remember here, probably a very good discussion about anti-imperialism versus, of course, workers' movements, which, as we know with Libya and other countries, is that sometimes you can have a workers' movement which upholds imperialist objectives. But now we're talking about a country that's a former Soviet republic, lots of oil, lots of gas, lots of resources, and foreign companies, Western companies, are already there extracting the wealth. And we do have an elite that are having, after the fall of the Soviet Union, stolen and taken all of the state assets of Kazakhstan, the former Soviet assets, and put them into the private hands of a bourgeois or of some sort of class. So there's a lot of elements to this. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah. So I guess what can give us more clue is to look at a kind of a basic composition or a formula of what does a color revolution consist of. How does it work? What does it actually look like? Well, in the most general sense, it's based off of a unified media amplification of the dissatisfaction of whatever people in whatever region that is a target. And then next up would be the kind of, I would say, the increase of intensity and intensity of violence directed by certain specific groups within the movement. Part 3 would be international media coverage, giving it a kind of unified, one-sided narrative. And then step 4 would be, instead of being a revolution to, as in the classical sense of changing the socioeconomic order, changing the societal consensus, changing the way social organizations are and social relations are conducted, then social relations are organized. Then what you do is a kind of deliberate, just pure sabotage against the country. There was the 2016 GitHub essay by one of the Pentagon security focus groups that talked about how using a color revolution tactic through the use of internet, amplifying information, skewing reporting, so as I was talking about before, combined with very few low-risk assets in the country, can be turned into a tool that is arguably more powerful than sending, say, Green Berets behind enemy line to blow up facilities. Because the amount of paralysis that these kinds of color revolution riots can cause by attacking government headquarters, government facilities, government personnel, so on and so forth, is actually comparable to that of a military invasion. So, with that all out of the way, let's look at the situation in Kazakhstan. It's not exactly directed by the United States. Because, it, like you said, it already has control of the gas over there. Why would you want to mess up something that you got your hands on, right? But then why is all the symptoms, with the exception of the part of the United States, look so incredibly similar to all the color revolutions of the past in Hong Kong, in Moscow, so on and so forth, in Arab Spring, of course. There's a few ways we can interpret this. One way to interpret this is that the liberals, because in order for another element for a color revolution to succeed, or to even take off the ground, is for there to be a liberal middle class elite in that place that is fully subscribed to the Western Anglophonic liberal ideology. And so of course one interpretation could be like those people are just, they've somehow gotten some wrong signal that somehow like the United States wants them to do this and just went out and did this on their own. Or a second possibility, which is that finance capital outside of the United States wants to do something with this. Because we must remember, anti-imperialism is not just anti-US. US is the imperialist country, but imperialism is global. It's global.
There are other financial interests too. There's not just just to give the detail on that one specifically. Exactly. The color revolution narrative is always underpinned by, we always understand that imperialism has an economic interest in exploiting the resources of the country in which we assume usually the color revolution is one where the country has a government that is set up and owns resources. Perhaps they're nationalized, or perhaps it's a local national bourgeois, or whatever it is. But imperialism is trying to break into that and access that market or access those resources.
So
in this case, ExxonMobil and Chevron have already invested tens of billions of dollars in Western Kazakhstan. But perhaps we could argue that they have an interest in dislodging the current Kazakh government so that they can extract it more. But this is all speculation now. But yeah, go ahead.
I want to mention two more things. One is whatever the situation actually turns out to be, and we must, as Marxists who's interested in the social science, must investigate. Why? Because if it's a misfiring of sorts, then maybe that tells us, that reveals some truth about liberalism, how it is so depraved that it can bite back on even its own masters or whatever. And if it is planned by global finance capital, then it's a warning that to all of us that even after the United States has declined or even hypothetically collapsed. Let's see. It only takes 2 years to find out. With the whole Trump thing. Then imperialism is not over. As in global finance capital, Western imperialism is actually not over, even after that's gone. So either way, it will be very important for us. That's the first thing to mention. The second thing to mention is, we have to remember that color revolution is not only right wing. Remember, the action in Hong Kong was that the original action item, one of the economic fundamental foundational reasons, is due to the dissatisfaction with the off-the-charts prices of housing in Hong Kong and living in general. That's a leftist issue, okay?
Yeah,
and the reason that is the way it is in Hong Kong is precisely because the CPC signed a treaty that it will not intervene no matter what on earth the Hong Kong capitalist billionaires resort to. And that's why things have gotten so bad. And look at now, as soon as a national security law is passed, they're already doing things to drive down the real estate prices, establish affordable housing, so on and so forth, right? So yes, it's a left-wing thing, and there is even communist things about it. But the again, colonial language, but I think in this case is fitting. The crowning jewel of liberal propaganda theory of what the United States call narrative warfare and narrative manipulation is that it is irrespective of allegiances and loyalties and taking any sides. It can literally is capable of turning any language in weaponize it into anything else, even if it starts from a position of good things.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think, to be honest, so this instance of this violence, these protests, this is very fresh right now. So this is from January 5th. It started on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, Wednesday, so late Wednesday. So we're still seeing this unfold. To be honest, it hasn't really been covered as a central feature on a lot of the news that I watch. So we'll have to see how this goes on. But I think there's going to be an interesting conversation amongst communists, online communists, and all types of communist organizations.
And just, I would say, like experts across the world in general.
Right, exactly, because we've seen the KKE's statement on this is very much in favor of this as being a crackdown on the people, and the people are rising against the corrupt bourgeois. But as you said, the language of the left can also potentially be used to advance the causes of imperialism.
I want to bring some very short examples. If I were to utter the phrase "down with the dictator,"
yes,
that can be both left wing and right wing.
Yeah, of course.
If I utter the phrase "power to the people," that can be both the socialist sense or the Nazi sense of power to the whatever race.
Which people?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Things are not that simple. Things are not that simple, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
sure. So we'll probably be covering that one. We'll get some more analysis and perhaps get some feedback from other contributors on that one, see what their thoughts on that one are. But we are finished for this week. We've gone a bit over time, 10 minutes over, but that's okay. I'm sure it was worth it. And we'll catch you next week at this time. So our new time is Friday morning for China, and Thursday evening for the east coast of the US. And that will be our new time. So we'll be doing that every week on Friday morning, Thursday night, no longer Wednesday, Thursday. So so if you were curious about that, that's what's happened. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Jen. It's always good to speak to you. And we'll speak to you next week. Thank you much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.